The four horsemen of the Apocalypse are coming. Are you ready? Are you ready for what is coming? Greetings, I'm David Brett here with John Fisher bringing you Revealing the Truth. And today we're going to look at the book of Revelation to see these four horsemen of the Apocalypse, as they're called. And this fits in with other apocalyptic literature such as Daniel. And we can also look at Matthew 24, which is essentially a parallel that we see to Revelation chapter 6, in which we see these seals being broken and these scrolls being opened and revealing to us what is yet to come ahead of us. Now, one of our responsibilities is to teach about the coming kingdom, to proclaim the good news. And indeed, we do proclaim the Messiah. We are proclaiming him and the coming kingdom in which he will reign, in which, if we overcome, we will reign with him, even being able to sit on his throne, which he'll be given. And this is something else that is revealed to us in the book of Revelation. But going back to Matthew 24, we find in verse 14, "This evangel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Well, we find that the message, the good news about the coming kingdom and what is to take place is going out to the nations. There are still some countries that the languages are being worked on so that they'll have the Bible into their own language in their hands. There are some details of the Bible that we get into more so here than are typically known, but we're to study, we're to show ourselves approved, to be good stewards, and to share what we find with others. But one of the things we find coming before the Messiah's return, before this kingdom is established, is trouble. A great tribulation, a great day of Yahweh, as it's referred to in Joel 2 and in verse, starting out in the verses there. We find that even Revelation starts out with the idea of this great tribulation. You have in chapter 1 and verse 3, "Behold, the time is near." Verse 7, "He is coming." And in verse 10, "The Lord's day." The day of Yahweh is actually how that is translated or how that should be written. We find that in Joel 2, verses 1 and 2. It talks about a day of darkness, of gloom, of destruction. And this is what John, the Apostle John, now called Elder, is referring to in a number of the pages we find in the book of Revelation. We find trumpet blasts, we find bowls being poured out, destruction, death, carnage, and we find one of the first things mentioned is this white horse. In Matthew, I think we can relate this as deception. We find in Revelation 6, 1 through 2, "Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, 'Come!' And I looked, and behold, a white horse. And its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he came out conquering and to conquer." Well, one thing that's been noticed is this bow does not have any arrows. It's representative of deception. There's no real power or strength there. And this white horse is being revealed by none other than the Lamb. Now there can be some confusion if you look at Revelation 19 and verse 11, which shows Yahshua on a white horse. But this is not Yahshua. This is deception. This is the anti-Messiah that is coming. And it talks about in Matthew 24 about these false messiahs arising. And certainly the man of sin, the false messiah, these are things ahead of us.
So even though the title of this book is the revelation of Yahshua Messiah, it's also a revelation of the anti-Messiah as well. And the Greek word for revelation is apocalypse. And so when we hear the word apocalypse, what do we think? Well, I mean, I think of the movie that has the word apocalypse in it about Vietnam, destruction and terror. And that is certainly what is being revealed. Mm-hmm. But also what is being revealed is the truth. And what the consequences of people who do not believe the truth and have, or those who do not basically follow the commandments of Yahweh and have the testimony of Yahshua Messiah.
Yeah. Now there is going to be a bit of a purification process going through the fire, so to speak, to refine people, certain ones, and there will be those that will die but will be given robes. And we've looked at this, and the robes, it's interesting, they're not referred to as linen as what is given to the bride. The bride has white linen that is given to her, and in fact that's mentioned twice, so there's double emphasis there. So when we consider some of these areas of Scripture, we have to go and look at different areas and kind of put these together as a piece of puzzle. But when we look at Revelation 6 and we see these seals being broken, these scrolls being opened to give understanding, I mean, we could look at parts of Daniel and Matthew and these seals being broken with the scrolls being opened, and then trumpets and the bowls. If we think in 3 dimensions, we can see these stacked upon each other. In general, all of this is going to take place during the Great Tribulation, the day of Yahweh, a day of darkness and gloom and war. And in fact, when you look at Matthew 24, the question came up, what will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And he says the first thing, see to it that no one misleads you, in verse 4 of 24. He goes on, verse 5, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and will mislead many. Verse 6, and you will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars, but see that you're not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. But it goes on, and it goes over some of these things. And one of the things that opens up to us in Revelation 6 and verse 3 is this second seal being broken. And it says, when he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, come. Verse 4, and another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him, this rider. This red horse, I mean, if we were to pick a color for war, what would it be? I mean, men slaying one another, you'd see blood all over the place. And so that's what this red horse is representative of. And the rider, of course, is given this great sword. Now, these are symbolic, but, the horse, the riders, I think the first rider, of course, is the anti-Messiah, pointed out. But we see these as symbolic for actual things that are coming. And when you see these individuals given robes, for example, that die during the tribulation, it says that they cry out, well, how long, before blood is avenged? But we have to consider that the figurativeness in this, the allegorical nature, what it's pointing to, that's pointing to actual events that will take place. But just like Abel's blood was cried out, after Cain had killed him, that was just, it's symbolic of what had taken place.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah. And so we have to take these in context, because I think what we do see in Scripture is that people die and they are laid to rest in a grave. There's no planning or even praising Yahweh from the grave. Though the spirit goes back to Yahweh, the people are dead, essentially. And it's not until Yahshua returns that there's this resurrection. And so we see a first resurrection, a second resurrection. We have literature on this for greater study. But it's some of the things that we have to cover in this particular chapter as we go through it.
In this chapter, I want to go back to one of the quotes you made in verse 5 of Matthew 24. It says, "For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and will deceive many." Now, originally in the Greek, there are no punctuation, but this has been punctuated in such a way with the intent saying that people will come and say that they are the Messiah. And of course, we see that in this presence, and that issue is dealt with in verse 24 of chapter 24. But here in verse 5, it's Yahshua is saying that people will come and say that I am the Messiah, but they will deceive many. And we see this more abundantly in this world. People who believe in the Messiah, but they are teaching false doctrines that are against Yahweh and are, as he describes, abominations, creating new holidays and not going by the holy days, the appointed times of Yahweh.
Yeah,
it's
deception.
an important issue.
Yeah, Satan is a counterfeit, and what better way to get people away from Yahweh or turn them away than to put up things that look nice and that are counterfeits. I mean, if we saw a fake $100 bill laying on the ground, we would be eager to pick it up, wouldn't we? But if we really examine it, we would see that it's not an original. It's not the real thing. It's worthless. And that is actually what Jeremiah prophesies that the people will be saying when they go into the kingdom. And of course, the two witnesses will show up on the scene and will be teaching and opening up people's minds, I hope, to the truth. And in fact, I think that's what Jeremiah prophesies, in the sense that they will be saying, you know, our fathers have told us lies. They have given us customs that are worthless. Now, this wasn't a prophecy to, you know, Judah going into captivity, Babylonian captivity. It's prophecy for the end of the age, before the Messiah returns, during this time of tribulation. And when we look at these, when we look at Matthew 24, and it does talk about the Great Tribulation, verse 21. When we look at these trumpets and the bowls, we have to look at them in general. But we do see the intensity getting more intense before Yahshua's return. And one of the things that really irks Yahweh and gets his wrath and anger going is when the nations surround Israel, the apple of his eye. And we're not talking about just the land, we're talking about the people. But in talking about the people, there's so much confusion about who Judah is. Well, Judah is Israel in a sense, but they are only one tribe. We're talking about all 12 tribes of Israel when we talk about Israel. And we do have a mini study called The Hope of Israel, and it's free of charge and is available. But when we look at the tribulation, we see it is the day of Yahweh, not the Lord's day, as so many translations have in the book of Revelation starting out there. It is the day of Yahweh. John understood this. And we want you to understand, too, that this is ahead of us. And it's important to know, because we should be prepared for the difficulties that are yet ahead of us. But when we come back, we're going to take a look at the other two horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Who has ascended into heaven and descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has wrapped the waters in his garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, or his son's name, if thou canst tell? Hello, I'm Carrie Brett with Yahweh's Assembly in Yahshua. Learn more about the importance of the divine names of our Heavenly Father and His Son, as well as getting better insight of the Scriptures that will help you to learn biblical truth. Request our free literature, Discovering the Name of Yahshua in the King James Bible, and the Hebrew-Aramaic origin of the New Testament. To receive your free literature, visit us online at www.yaiy.org. You can also write to YAIY, 2963 County Road 233, Kingdom City, Missouri 65262, or call us toll-free at 1-877-642-4101.
Of the four horsemen, there is still the black horse, the rider on it, and also a pale horse and a rider there. But before we go there, we want to talk a little bit about the tribulation in the sense of this coming before the Messiah's return. A lot of people are praying for the Messiah to return, and yet they don't fully understand that he is actually going to be involved during this tribulation period, in which we see, I think in Daniel it talks about there's a 7-year peace process that's going to take place. This man of sin is going to broker that. And then in the midst of that, he's going to walk into the Holy of Holies and proclaim himself as someone he's really not. Mm-hmm. And that is when tribulation really starts in earnest. And it's going to be a 3.5-year period, it appears to be, in which this will all take place and be finished up. But we see in Revelation 6 and verse 14, let's back up to there and just see how intense it's going to be. It says, "The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and every island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains." Verse 16, "And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the Lamb." In verse 17, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand or to withstand? And indeed, just as a parent will grab a child and spank him, this world is going to be punished. That is what this wrath is about, because of the sinfulness of this country and of this world in general. And we find that we are told essentially to come out of her, to not partake of her sins, so that we do not partake of these plagues. But it appears that we will be going through this, and we understand that it's going to be bad. However, sometimes I think we lose sight that even the Messiah will be involved in this, in delving out this wrath. And he's said he does nothing but what his Father wants. And his Father is going to pour out wrath upon this world because of its sins, because of its transgressions against him, against the Father.
Right, and I think it's really important that we understand that this is this is a unique display of wrath. This is the end. This is the final judgment. Mm-hmm. And when people...
Well, in a sense, it's a final judgment. There's still a great white throne judgment after
right.
that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm trying to compare that to what we experience in this life. When things happen to us, when we go through trials and tribulations, or even when Yahweh, through Yahshua, puts stumbling blocks in front of us, or causes tragedy. That's not a wrathful judgment. That's given to us to bring us back in line with His Word. We experience these. I mean, Paul talked about that. He had a thorn in his side. He prayed intensely to have it removed, but the answer was no. Mm-hmm. Why? To keep him humble. He realized that, so that he wouldn't develop a sense of pride and That's all designed to bring him into the kingdom, which he acknowledges. It's not a judgment. It's not an end to his life that he has this thorn. It's something that is provided for us from a loving father who disciplines a son that he loves. Mm-hmm. They're two different things.
Yeah. And, even though there is, on the big scale and through the tribulation, there is death, there's also the resurrection process in which people will be given insight and help. I think at that time, if they've never understood before, they certainly will at the great white throne judgment. And it's not just, Yahweh's going to start pulling levers and people are going to drop off in the lake of fire. No, I think there's serious discernment that's going to take place. And as a righteous judge judges, those that knew much, they'll receive greater stripes, but those that knew little, they'll receive few stripes. And that's what Yahshua relates to us. Now, in Revelation 6, verses 5 through 6, we get into the black horse and its rider. And then the Lamb, this is Yahshua opening up the seal, opened up the third seal, and I heard a third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. Well, this is understood to be roughly just having enough to eat, affording enough to eat from a day's wages. And, if a person has 2 or 3 in the family and one is working, this is going to be tough to survive. It's going to be a famine. And that's what this black horse is, and its rider is representing, famine. And certainly there's oil and wine that's mentioned, and it says do not damage those. Those are going to become very valuable. And with the war that is preceding this, of course, this is all in general, I think, to a certain extent. The wine and the oil can actually be used medicinally, and for those type of wounds and such. So there's valuable resources that are going to be kind of rare. And even today, there's a national or worldwide wine organization that basically said the demand is outstripping the supply, even now. So, are we getting closer? Well, of course, we're closer now than at any other time in history towards this point in time of the Great Tribulation. But it may be many, many years. It may not even be in our lifetime. But if it is in our lifetime, are we ready? That's the question from the start. Are we ready for what is coming? Will we be able to stand at Messiah's return? And we have to understand just how bad it will be prior to his coming and in the sense of his feet landing on the Mount of Olives. Tough times yet ahead during this period. And even now we see economic woes and difficulties. But in Matthew 24, Yahshua says these earlier things, rumors and hearing of war, these type of things, don't let it bother you. There's still tough times yet ahead. Revelation 6, 7 through 8, it says, "And when he opened the fourth seal," Yahshua opened up this fourth seal. It says, and John relating this, he says, "I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, 'Come and see.' And I looked and saw a pale horse, and he who sat on it had the name of Death. And the grave followed him, and authority was given to him over a fourth of the earth to kill with a sword, and with hunger, and with death, and by the beasts of the earth." Interestingly enough, there's this new documentary called The Pig Bomb, which talks about these razorback swine that have gotten into most all the states here in the...
Imported from Russia.
Well, it's been suggested that because they're so large and ferocious, and they've caused like $50 million of damage a year in Texas for the crops there, that these are not just your local, swine hogs, but are very serious in the sense that they got these large tusks and are, upwards of 1,000 pounds. But there's other things that are, out there that, if there's war and, buildings are destroyed In fact, in Daniel, it says all the cities, not some of them, it says all of the cities will be destroyed. Somewhere in there in Daniel 9 through 12 there. But we find that if that takes place, and it says it will take place, well, how about the zoos? They're holding lions, they're holding bears, and they're going to be hungry if they're not being fed by caretakers. So, we can see some of these things taking place. But this pale horse is not just pale. The wording, the original wording we see is actually like a yellow or grayish green color. And so it's sickly. And when you see gangrene and these type of things occurring and death and rigor mortis setting in bodies, I mean, it's kind of graphic, but we have to understand that this is something that's going to come worldwide. It's not just going to be here and there, but it is going to, this particular section talks about a fourth of the earth being affected, being killed. So we have sword, hunger, death, all this, death by animals. And then we get into the other seals, which talk about some of these other things. But these can all be looked at, the trumpets, the bowls, which we haven't actually looked at today, but they're in Revelation. In fact, the trumpets really get going in verse 8. I think we can see the seventh seal from Revelation 6 being opened up, and it opens up these trumpets. And so it's all kind of tied in. But the duration, it looks to be, is about 3.5 years, which is a merciful thing. I had thought before it was 7 years total, and I was, I think, incorrect on that. But, we have to look at these things with an open mind and consider how they'll play out. But in Matthew, going back to Matthew, we do see that in chapter 24, that there will be, in verse 21, that there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. But notice in verse 22, unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And what we see with the elect is saints, those that are preparing themselves for the marriage supper. And they're a small group. They're like a small flock. They are not great in number, and yet they will be first fruits in the coming kingdom. They will be spirit beings ruling with Yahshua on his throne and being a part of the ruling authority. And of the ruling authority, what law do you think will be presented?
I was going to ask the same question.
Yahweh's law will be enforced. Right now we're learning and we're coming to understand that there are certain things required of us today, the works that need to be done to show our faith and belief and prove ourselves worthy of his continued kindness and mercy in our lives and for eternal life.